Hi, it's Jenny Filippetti from Majestic Collaborations and the Changing the Tune project, a new initiative of the Folk Alliance International, supported by Performing Arts Readiness, to build resilience within the folk community in response to the pandemic and beyond. In our Folk Unlocked session, you hopefully heard a little context for the big picture of organizational resilience and response in confronting the pandemic. We ended by asking what specific approaches you might do or think about right now to plan for these next few months. In this video, our session panelists will first introduce you to the process of scenario planning as a tool for organizations to help guide your decision-making. We'll then walk topic by topic through some of their advice about programming you might be considering for live, hybrid, and virtual or live-streamed events, and also some of the things that have shifted or are shifting in this landscape that we've already heard from you are on your radar, like changes in performance contract clauses. It's worth mentioning that as we have all experienced time and time again over this year, the pandemic situation is a constantly changing one, and in really uneven ways with different conditions and contexts from one place or one organization to another. What you'll hear about in this video came out of a series of interviews we did in early February 2021 for Folk Unlocked. And I think that the guidance and experiences described were worth sharing given what we know and where we find ourselves right now. But we're all learning all the time. The goals of the Changing the Tune project as a whole are to build resources and to continue tracking best practices from within the network to support you in both responding to this pandemic and preparing for future resilience in times of uncertainty or crisis. You can find out more about the project at folk.org/changingthetune, all hyphenated, or reach out to us there to share questions, ideas, or stories or suggestions of your own. As artists and professionals who coordinate gatherings, we've experienced how vulnerable this community is to disruptions like what happened with the pandemic shutdown. But it is also uniquely equipped with the experience, values, and skills to respond resiliently if suitably prepared. This network is already pioneering emerging forms of emergency response that prioritize equity and resilience, and the Changing the Tune project is all about finding and sharing that knowledge with anyone who can benefit from it. We're first going to introduce you to our panelists again, in case you didn't catch them at the Folk Unlocked session. Again, my name is Jenny. I'll just add that my pronouns are she and her. I've got light skin and brownish blonde hair and green eyes, today in a goldenrod dress and black jacket. I'm standing in front of some books and colorful objects on a bookshelf that's actually weirdly the side of my refrigerator in Milan, Italy.
So I'm Mark Laurie. I'm the Vice President of the Contemporary Division at Skyline Artist Agency. We're a boutique booking agency for North America. We've been in business over 25 years. We exclusively represent about 60 artists in a wide range of genres. I personally represent Darlingside, We Banjo 3, Caitlin Canty, the Oshima Brothers, the Way Down Wanderers, the Hillbenders, and maybe a half a dozen others. I'm pleased to be here today.
My name is Kowal and I am the artistic director of Handsome Little Devils. My pronouns are she and her, and I am zooming from my basement. I have a background that has a mountainscape with a lot of evergreen trees. I have long, dark blonde hair. I'm wearing a green blazer and a green necklace, and I have blue eyes.
Hello, I'm Molly Quinlan Hayes. I am a middle-aged white woman, brunette with glasses and freckles, wearing a winter white jacket. And my pronouns are she and hers. And I am coming to you from the land of the Eastern Cherokee and the Lower Muskogee Creek people. I'm a freelance arts consultant based in Atlanta and am on the steering committee of NCAPER, which is really working to provide a national safety net for artists and arts organizations.
Hi, I'm Jan Newcomb, and I'm a white woman with blonde hair with horizontal gray striped sweater on, sitting in my office in Corning, New York, which is the land, it's in the upstate Finger Lakes, and it's a land of Haudenosaunee, which we knew as children as the Iroquois Confederacy of Seneca, Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Onondaga, and Tuscarora nations, tribes. I am the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, commonly known as NCAPER. And I'm also the Performing Arts Coordinator of the PAR project, which is Performing Arts Readiness.
What we were really looking at with arts organizations at a crossroads is more of the structural, the existential, if organizations are really having to think about being a different kind of organization, what might that look like and how might we help? And the first outing of this was research of art service organizations and funders across the country, kind of see where the needs were. And we did hear that, in fact, at that time, this was in August, September, October, that there were organizations that were considering going on long-term hiatus, looking at having to merge or cut down, restructure their organizations, looking potentially even at closure. And so our first resource was a set of resources to help organizations really understand what their options were.
In this section, we'll be looking in more depth at the planning process itself, and see in particular how the practice of scenario planning can help as you look ahead into an uncertain future. A readiness plan is about making decisions in advance of crisis about how you'll respond, and collecting all the information and materials that you'll need in order to do that.
It's about making sure you're asking the right questions of yourself and giving yourself honest answers is what solid planning really is. And that is the next phase of arts organizations at a crossroads, is helping design what are the smartest and most relevant questions to ask yourself to identify what your possible pathways are.
It needs to be organizational culture of readiness.
I think it can also at this point make you more competitive in fundraising. If you can tell your donors, or if you're writing a grant, that you have a readiness plan and they know that their investment is protected, I think that's a really savvy thing to do.
Then they walked us through scenario planning, one tool among several within an overall culture of preparedness, designed to help organizations make plans and design business strategies for the future, even when that future is extremely uncertain or unpredictable.
To me, scenario planning is sitting around and what if, and that's kind of the basic premise of it, and it really leads to business continuity. But having options and having the people at the table to really discuss the assessment of what could happen and what do you do if that happens. Having run organizations, that's kind of what I would do in strategic planning. That the scenario planning was always very helpful and engaging to staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The idea of looking at possibilities and then what will be your decisions. I think there are a couple of, and I'll show some visual examples in a minute, but I think some of the value of that in all of our work in kind of readiness and business continuity planning, and I'll put a plug in here for artsready.org, a national initiative that I direct out of South Arts. It's really helping organizations to build readiness plans. The idea is that you don't make good decisions when you're kind of pressed to the wall. So making those decisions ahead of time allows you to take kind of the emotional out of it. And although often we've thought of that in a physical, a time-based crisis, a fire or suddenly losing a leader. Now I think those skills and those building that muscle memory can be important in this particular environment as well, because you're going to come to situations where it will be painful to make decisions. For instance, and there's a great piece out of Sea Change Capital Partners helping leaders make decisions in this time. And they talk about the fact that you might say, okay, if our cash on hand reaches a certain floor, then that's going to trigger, we're going to, stop paying our rent, which I'm not recommending that you stiff your landlord, but or you're going to stop paying vendors, or you're going to have to cut these two positions. But I think what that does is it takes the emotion out of it. It's a management decision, and if people have to, if positions have to be cut, there's obviously a clear understanding that's not because they failed personally or professionally. It's these constraints being put on us by external forces. So having those kinds of decisions up front, I think, is healthy for both the board and the chief executive. And also, I think scenario planning can range from, a week or a month or a quarter to, years out. Years out, I don't think makes a lot of sense for us right now, although maybe 1 to 2 years out. So I'm going to share just two kind of different ends of the spectrum of scenario planning kind of lenses. So this is a really nice little cheat sheet, again, that speaks to Jan's idea of that it's if this then. So your first step is to establish your assumptions. What are the knowns and unknowns? What are your non-negotiable principles? And what are your top priorities? Next, the second step is you gather data, you run some numbers. What do you have to work with in terms of assets, financial and human and other and artistic? Third, select courses of action, and you might decide there are 2, 4, 5 different courses of action depending on which scenario plays out for you. What triggers those actions? What's your time frame? And how are you going to internally and externally communicate changes? One thing I think it's important in this time is to make sure that your funders and your stakeholders and your donors are very clear about where you are and how you're doing. And then the final step, number 4, is again to act and monitor and iterate. Stay agile, again, this nimbleness that Jan has talked about, making sure that you monitor the environment and changes that are occurring, optimizing your opportunities aligned to your organization's core values, and again, anticipating the future and looking at trends. One thing that I think is really great about this model is that, again, in 1 and 4, it's all about mission, right? In what are your non-negotiable? What are your core values? What is your mission? You play out these scenes, look at your information, but then finally, you look at opportunities that are aligned to your organization's core values. Again, making sure that you're always working within mission. And I think that this is healthy because there are occasionally board members out there that want, we could do this, we could earn all this money if we went off and did this, or we should cut all of this because of that, or we should open up tomorrow. What this allows you to do is kind of frame decisions within the mission so that people can't kind of go off on crazy courses. And then kind of going to the other end of the spectrum in terms of the depth of scenario planning, I'll just introduce this, which came out in September, I think, from the Wallace Foundation. It's a free resource called Navigating Uncertain Times, a Scenario Planning Toolkit. And it was developed with AEA Consulting, an incredible group of really brilliant people. And what this does is look at look at macro forces, external forces, the economy, public health, politics, the likelihood of people being able to gather together again. Then you look at your state and your local forces, trends, but it actually looks at, for instance, if the pandemic gets under control in 2021 or it doesn't, if people can gather live in the next year or they can't. And it actually guides you through some very nuanced scenarios. So I think that this exercise is really healthy. And this just gives you, again, a sense of the range of how deeply and how much time you can invest in those.
In this next section, we'll be focusing on programming, with some advice for the next few months, whether you expect to be doing modified live gatherings, virtual or live stream performances, or hybrid ones.
If you think you're going to play live, well, let me rephrase it. If you want to play live as soon as you can, I hope you've got your agent booking things for fall and winter now, because it's already super crowded and it's probably too late, actually, if you're just starting to do that right now. So that's number 1. Be thinking about when you want to play live again and make sure you're in sync with your team, way ahead of what it used to be. Because everything's been pushed. So if you're a band, how much have you discussed with your co-members if you're all in sync about these things,
One of the biggest things that it could be a missed opportunity for artists is to miss the moment that the vaccination is available to them. I think really find out what is the vaccination plan in your city. When are you in the group that will get a vaccination? Because there is going to be a hopefully short period of time, but there is going to be a period of time where vaccinated artists are going to be available for things that non-vaccinated artists are not. And if you can help with that effort and you can get vaccinated, you are going to be available sooner than other artists. I know it sounds real, it's very practical, but this is one thing, that's an opportunity not to be missed. Also, really tuning in, every time that our public health officers hop on, Facebook Live or Instagram Live, and they are giving an update on the numbers and reopening and all that, I stop what I'm doing and I tune in. I listen in and I see, hey, what's the latest? I think that that's something you can do right now, is just really arming yourself with information about the current situation. There's a lot of free trainings out there. There are emergency preparedness trainings. There's online trainings, to help you create, a safety plan for your organization. And for me, in the festival world, a lot of times the safety plan has to do with egress, how to get out of the festival safely if there's an issue, how to identify weather issues, how to respond to them when they happen, and making sure that your entire team is on the same page with that. That's something you can start working on right now, because festivals are going to come back. You're going to be playing a show and you're going to need this anyway. So start thinking about it right now.
The organizations that I have gotten information from for live performances, they are kind of over communicating, which I think is good, but they make absolutely sure that you understand everything from the time you buy a ticket and go to the venue and what to expect all the way through. So yeah, so that's the difference that I've seen. And I think that going forward, that's going to be a healthy practice. I think that those hybrids are something that I think I see a lot of and that we're going to likely see more of. People are going to have different levels of comfort coming back into spaces with other people. So I think those hybrids are something that's really going to live with us for a while.
And I think the hybrid idea is going to actually grow audiences, because an age group might not want to go out in the snow 20 miles to a performance, but if you can engage me in my home, I might stay involved in the organization and have my friends or whatever involved. So I think that smart ones are really going to continue doing hybrid even when things open back up. That's my guess.
Another area actually that's interesting that came up yesterday was I saw my first, this is breaking news, I saw my first offer yesterday that said, and we'll be doing a live stream of this show. This was for an in-person, like around 1,000 capacity venue. This would be an in-person show in the fall, but the promoter intends to also offer it virtually, and sent to me a unilaterally decided on split of the income, and more or less presented as we're going to do this as opposed to a negotiation point. And there's all kinds of issues involved with that. Do we want to put virtual on sale for a live in-person date before the live in-person tickets have sold out? No mention of that discussion. What is the ticket price of the virtual show? Will having a virtual ticket in one market impact our tour in other markets? Again, what is the fair split? There are licensing issues over that need to be discussed. So, well, I knew this would be coming because, as I've said, I do think virtual is going to continue, and I'm not opposed to it. Let me state, I'm not against this. I think the opportunity for an artist and a venue to sell an unlimited number of tickets to any show. I mean, there might only be a capacity in the venue of 1,000, but if you sell that out, why not sell another 1,000 virtual tickets? But is it geo-fenced? Is it limited to their geographic area because it might impact other shows? Or, these are all things that need to get worked out. So I'm curious how that'll go. And it did kind of strike me odd that it came as, oh, and we're doing this. And it's like, maybe not.
Let's check in with Mark about some of the practices he's been finding successful when it comes to designing virtual events. Stay tuned as well for our guide, Designing Inclusive Virtual Events, part of the Changing the Tune project.
If you haven't thought of a virtual strategy, you probably should be, because there is some money being made. And I'm not going to say it's a replacement, but it can help. I think there's a consensus now that streaming is not going away when COVID goes away. The question will be what aspects of streaming or how it's used remains. It lends itself well to certain artists better than others, and artists that don't particularly enjoy being on the road might and have had success in streaming certainly could decide to replace some live touring with a consistent level of streaming. And if you want to head in that direction, I think you need to get your audience used to buying a ticket. So that was why I favored that method. And I'm also not going to say that tip jar method without ticketing is necessarily wrong. I personally don't favor that plan. I think there are some acts that could do, a regular weekly tip jar and probably do fine. The other things I guess I've learned over it is, the whole concept of intimacy of me in my living room with just my guitar. It's cute, it'll work for a while, but it's not enough production value to charge a ticket for and to sustain. So I think going beyond a simple one camera, having really good audio, ideally having maybe some movement with cameras, location and backgrounds matter. But making it different each time is another important thing. So, that there's a reason for your fans to come back. One of my favorite live streams by one of my artists, Mick Flannery, who's a singer-songwriter from Ireland. And this was fairly early in the pandemic. They shot a live stream from a sculpture gallery, and it was just a gorgeous setting. And the video work was so stunning. And, that really opened my eyes to what you should think about and what things should look like. I would just say one more thing about that. There are some artists who are just naturally really, really good in an intimate situation in terms of their rapport with the audience. Even in a theater at a live show, you feel the connection and they interact with the audience, with some sort of a dialogue. It's obviously not a two-way dialogue, but it's somehow engages them. And I think, that type of situation, you can maintain the intimacy with maybe a little bit less production if you're strong in that area. So you have to take into account what your strengths are and make sure you deliver that in the live stream. Also, one thing I failed to mention is you need to do the promotion, just as you would live dates. So making sure you're listed on places like Bands in Town and Songkick, so your streaming events are going out, being fed out to everyone just like a live gig would. Keeping it a little rare is probably going to be more successful. And if you think about it, that is right in line with what happens live. I mean, you would not, especially if you're, let's say, a 500 or 1,000 ticket selling artist in a market, you don't go to that market more than once a year if you want to sustain those numbers or grow those numbers. So you can't ask your fans to come sign online with you once a week and think it's going to hold up over a long period of time. Mixing it up, if you're going to do it regularly, you maybe have some guests. That We Banjo 3 actually did a variety show for their Christmas show. They had other artists guesting who also participated in the affiliate situation. So they were rewarded for selling tickets. That's a neat idea. Sort of like you would maybe co-bill out on a live tour or something. But I think environment, mixing up what it's going to look like, maybe even making a theme. I know that many artists have done, we're going to play our second album in its entirety on this show. That's a good idea. But I think just falling in line with the things we've said, keep the production values high, keep the audience interested by mixing it up. And you got to think about those things. Pricing wise, looks to me like streaming runs $10 to $25, 10 being kind of low, maybe 15 kind of being an average, or 20. One thing I've advocated for and have seen really nice results with is we were talking a couple of my artists about actually doing a pay what you want. So it's ticketed. You can't get in without buying a ticket, but you could pay anything you want. So it could be a $1 ticket if the fan is comfortable with only paying $1, but you could also pay whatever you want. So never achieved that anywhere. Most of the formats, most of the platforms didn't really support that, setting up that type of ticketing situation. But we did something similar on a couple of shows where it was $20. And then we did a thing where it said, or $25 if you're watching with friends and family. So, or just want to help the band. So it's kind of like, well, you could pay 20, but if you want to help, we could use the 25. And we did extremely well with that. A lot of people chose that option, and maybe they were watching with friends. So, trying to get a little creative with the ticketing, I think, is important. What else? Tip, you can have a ticket and a tip jar. So that's a great thing.
On that note, this is actually a good moment to mention something else that came up throughout these interviews: being honest with your audience and asking for what you need. Although the pandemic has hit everyone hard, people actually understand the importance of what we do now more than ever. Don't lose sight of that as you're developing your programming, as you're negotiating contracts, and as you're communicating with your fans and audiences. Here's what our presenters suggested.
I think that the general public has been more tuned in to the problems with artists specifically in America. Like, there's not a lot of support for art. And so I think the public has been a little bit more hands-on with their support.
People want to help. I think that asking and saying what you need is important because people want to be helping somehow.
And they want to be part of it. I mean, that's the other thing, the communal aspect of that is really important.
When we launched Project Joy Bomb, we did also launch a GoFundMe. And we are not a company that does that very often. We usually self-fund, or we have guarantees and contracts for all of our work. It's just a model that works for us. So that was interesting because we hadn't done any fundraising in probably 10 years, I think. But we found that people were really willing to get behind it and support. They really loved just the concept. They loved that it was centering a conversation of mental health in this world. There has been a lot of talk about the mental health impacts of everything, but I think that the way that we were approaching it was really refreshing. It wasn't just doom and gloom, but just like, hey, we're here to help you in your mental health. One piece of advice directly to artists that I would say is, you're really valuable. We have lived through a year with very little art in our lives, and people are really missing it. And so it's really important to check your own worth. When we go out and we do Project Joy Bomb, people are crying and screaming and whooping. And they're so excited to see something happening because it's been such a desert of art and live interaction. People are really lonely and people really need that art. I was working with one of our community partners, and she said, artists are the bearers of hope. And there is so much value to that. I totally agree. I think that artists sort of shine a light on a very dark tunnel that, we are going to get through this. We're going to be okay. They help you remember what joy felt like before. And so that value is really strong. And when you're speaking to clients, I just try to be really upfront and just say, listen, I want to do this for you. I know that you want us to do something really cool for you. I think that it's really important to understand how much extra work it really is to do events now. It's probably, 50% more work for every event at least, just because you have to really make sure everyone is safe, that you have all the proper PPE. I just try to look at it like I'm an educator, and I am trying to educate clients about really how much more work this is. And it is so much more labor, and there's so much more coordination. You have to be really on top of your safety protocols to keep the audience and the performers safe. And once clients start seeing it in that way, they understand what a value it is to them to have a company being very responsible, because it helps protect them as well. They don't want their employees getting sick. They don't want anybody who's coming to their place to get sick. So they really do seem to come around on that. And then, there's compromises. We just have to be in a world of compromise right now. We have to be flexible. We have to be willing to work with each other. And I think one of the things that has come out of this is really seeing a lot more humanity in the client-artist relationship. I think that clients are much more empathetic and compassionate. And also, I think that artists are much more compassionate towards the position that, venue owners and community leaders are in with trying to bring back art and how difficult it is for them too. Another thing that's come up a bunch is the relationship between corporations and artists. And we have been really lucky. We have a couple of corporate clients that have just gone above and beyond to try and keep us afloat, to try and hand us work as we can. It's been amazing. And I think that performers need to really, cultivate those corporate relationships. Also, corporations, I think, really need to center a lot of their focus on artists. Artists add so much to venues. They add so much to real estate spaces. There's a venue here, or a space called Dairy Block here, where the Petite Parade will be happening. And they get it. They engage artists at every corner of their property. They have amazing sculptures. They have amazing artwork on the walls. They have amazing murals. It's like one of the most Instagrammable places in Denver. But they're employing artists all the time. And I think that the more that corporations can try and to keep that on their mind, they will get the value back tenfold. Having an artistic eye in your corporate atmosphere is so valuable. It's valuable to your staff. It's valuable to your clients. People want things that look good. People want things that feel good. I book musicians at their space on the weekends, now that we can finally have live music again. And it is transformative. When there is live music happening outdoors in their alley and people are walking around, this joy fills the space, and it is like a totally new life to the space. So that's something I think that, if you have corporate clients you've worked with before, call them now and say, hey, we have this service that we can offer, whatever it is. We're a band that can play outdoors safely. We're a band that loves to play outdoors. That is really valuable to them. And then if you are a CEO, you better have artists on your timeline here to look at, because it is so important for you to be engaging artists as well. I think that any corporation that's not trying to find that sort of artistic something, whatever works, for you, they're going to be left behind. Because I think that people are so deprived of art right now that if you're not engaging with artists, you're going to be yesterday's news.
I think what this has done is shown us how important music and live music is to us all. It's been really encouraging to me how many people talk about it, that are not in our industry or in our circles, or just everyday people who miss it so badly and want to get back to it. And we certainly know that a lot of music is emotionally strong. A song has a particular meaning to somebody, or at a moment in their life gives them hope, or they can commiserate with. And, I just think in some ways it's been good that we've realized how important music is. There was an incredibly profound moment. I will have difficulty not choking back tears here, but my client Darlingside did their very first stream, not until, I believe it was early October. And they don't live together. They live in the same general area, but they had not even seen each other since March, because they have young families and they wanted to stay safe. Massachusetts, a pretty locked down state, and they were observing. And so that stream came on and they came together, and Harris, who introduces the band every night right after the first tune, he started to say, he broke down. And everyone on the chat was writing how they were weeping. And it was just profound as hell. It was just incredible. And you could feel it. So it just hit so deeply to me. I lost it totally. And I miss those guys, and I hadn't seen them either. So, and their music is, I mean, I don't want to take advantage and make a pitch here, but I think everyone knows their music is hauntingly beautiful. And it was just so moving. And I think that was, to me, that's the poster moment for this whole crisis. And we'll get back.
This final section is a few reflections from Mark about some of the current questions and potential long-term impacts of the pandemic on the folk industry, including some big ones to be aware of about shifts he's seeing in contract terms and insurance clauses. You'll also hear from Matthew Kowal, the co-founder of Majestic Collaborations, about another big picture way that this pandemic is increasing momentum on new synergies between folk, arts, and event workers, and community resilience and mutual aid projects.
Yeah, I think the virtual thing for sure is going to become an income stream in some fashion for people. I'm wondering, I'm not predicting, I'm wondering what's going to happen. Like, will some artists, and it may be very artist dependent, consider moving a little bit away from as heavy a touring, so if something like this happens again, they aren't in as vulnerable a position. I don't think that will happen in the short run, because I think in the short run, everybody's going to be like, oh my God, we can't wait to get back out to live music. But like I said before, I think some artists are very well suited to virtual, and will probably morph their calendar to replace some live touring income with virtual touring income. I'm curious again, and I'm concerned to some degree about what changes go on in the legal issues and the promoter-artist relationship. So, one of the areas Nito's been highly engaged in, and in fact, just this morning, the board was sent an email with changing festival offer contract terms and addendum terms coming to us from AEG. Just this morning, new drafts of that came in, and we haven't talked about this, but as soon as the pandemic hit, Live Nation and AEG immediately were like, we got to have some kind of protection. Like, if we're going to go ahead with Coachella or something, we can't be held responsible for artist fees if all of a sudden the government says you can't have the festival. And a reasonable position for sure to worry about, but they kind of went right to, oh, too bad. It's your tough luck now. If that happens, we're not going to pay you anything. So we can cancel within 60 days, which of course is crippling to artists. And I mean, I think most of this battle is going on at the headliner level, because obviously the dollar amounts being talked about are much more significant. And even their touring issues, because, a $100,000 artist at Coachella, that comes along with a very severe radius clause. So if you take that date and you give up plenty of other things to get that date, and then they can cancel on you with 60 days notice, you've got logistical costs that have probably been spent. You've got all these other dates you've passed on. But it does trickle down to the lower levels. And what they do in these terms will trickle down to other promoters. The next level promoters will say, well, if they're getting away with not being responsible for cancellation insurance, and they tossed in, this is the one that was really troublesome, they tossed in weather. Like, all of a sudden now they don't have to pay if weather cancels their festivals. So, this is an ongoing battle, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all works its way out post-COVID. So will they have, once we're past that, obviously they'll keep a clause about other pandemics or other health issues, but will they get away with, like, yeah, you got to buy your own weather cancellation insurance? That's a tough thing on artists, and particularly at lower levels, because they're not making enough money to afford to do that. So I'm really, again, glad for NITO. One of the things NITO is doing is we're at the table, with the legal representative of AEG. That's why we got the email this morning. And we fought hard that, well, whatever you do for WME and CAA, you need to do for members of NITO. And it was encouraging, actually, in that email. It does state that they're going to have one consistent policy for all agencies. It's not going to be that the big boys get preferential treatment. So yeah, those are the things I'm looking at. Like, what's it going to look like? NITO board had talked fairly early on about, hey, well, we got to write some kind of clause that says, hey, if you're running one of these drive-in shows or claiming it's socially distant show with maybe circles marked on the ground or even indoors with 6 feet distance, we really kind of need a common clause that protects the artist's health and exposure. And we started working on that, and a couple of versions were sent around. And then the whole Live Nation AEG dropping the bomb of changing all the festival offers and terms kind of stole the focus away from that. So I don't really know what other agents have done about it. Here at Skyline, we've issued a number of contracts, and I think each of our agents have written a clause a little different than, we haven't really developed a perfectly standard clause. There's a very common one out there, which is, if you have a guarantee to the artist, let's say $4,000 guarantee that a lot of the promoters are using, which just says, try to get it encapsulated as best I can, but should the door gross of the show end up being less than the guarantee we've promised to the artist, then the artist will only get the door gross. So that protects the buyer to some degree, and I would say it's certainly, to me, it's a reasonable request. If your artist can't gross what they're being paid, they probably were being overpaid, because obviously there are other costs beyond just the fee to the artist. So I mean, that's sort of a baseline level protection that seems to have worked for a lot of promoters and is palatable to me. But yeah, it's just another deal point. And I hope everyone's considering that in advance, so you don't get to the point later that, oops, we didn't talk about this. I mean, most of my dates in the fall that have been rebooked, with the hope of full capacity, the promoters are insisting on a COVID out clause, which they should have. So for me, it's important that it says, if you're going to say you need the right to get out of the contract because of COVID, I want it to say you have the right to get out of the full capacity if a governmental authority has told you you can't be at full capacity. If it's blanket that, well, we can just say COVID has limited ticket sales, or they call up and say, well, your show's not selling well, we think it's COVID. That's a little bit nebulous and doesn't protect artists well. I think the spirit, especially at our level and in the folk community, has always been more towards, this is a partnership. We're not looking to take advantage of our promoters. And if they honestly can't put on a full capacity show, we need to deal with that as far in advance as possible and renegotiate and make it work for everyone. But it has been challenging to write those. And the other side of it is, well, what do you say? Like, when we were dealing with it with NITO, it was like, we did have a chat with the AEG rep about, the other side of their negotiations. Like, how do we know our artists are going to be safe at your festival? Yeah, there's both sides of that need to be considered. And it's still sort of a work in progress. And I think what I've seen to this extent is it's just been sort of specific to each venue and each agent, what they're comfortable with for their artist.
Hi, I'm Matthew Kowal from Denver, Colorado, the territory historically claimed by the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho tribes. I'd like to recognize elders past, present, and future who've stewarded this land, now known as Colorado. I'm male in his 40s with a beard and no hair on top, and I'm wearing a black suit jacket and a black shirt, and my background is a 70s looking piece of art with a gold frame and an exploding sun. I work with Majestic Collaborations. We consult with agencies and organizations and artists to look at resilience and emergency planning. We've been doing this for several years with Performing Arts Readiness and work in grants to do emergency planning and a experiential learning program called the Art of Mass Gatherings. One of the big and powerful things we've seen during this pandemic is that the role of artists is critical through all phases of disaster response and planning, mitigation, recovery. And it's illuminated a lot of the ideas that we've had in the past that this was an important place for us to play a role, but also show a lot of things we didn't know and has accelerated our learning. We saw the letter to Biden from the NITO group that Mark Laurie talked about, saying, hey, we're event workers and professionals and venues, and what part can we play in pandemic response and recovery? And this is a more formal way of talking about some issues that we think are well talked about in the Art of Mass Gatherings curriculum, where we do skill sharing across many disciplines. And so we encourage people from different backgrounds in agencies and event producers to say, hey, we've been making temporary cities as part of our work as event producers or as city agencies supporting this. And we want to be part of a larger resiliency network for medium-term issues as well beyond the pandemic. This might just be a fire drill for things like an economic disruption or long-term climate change. Cities are going to need to think about how to be on their feet when the cities as we know them might change. So check out the Community Resilience Corps for arts and cultural workers. You can email me at majesticcollaborations.com, Matthew. And we have a survey we'd love for you to beta test with us. And we're happy to be working with the Folk Alliance International in the Changing the Tune initiative, and look forward to talking about this if you'd like to reach out. Thank you very much.